Welcome back, it's me Lou, and I'm here for another action figure unboxing and review. First off, if you're new to this channel, welcome. I appreciate you checking this video out. If you are a returning viewer or subscriber, thanks again for coming by, I greatly appreciate it. So, let's get this show started. Alright, for today's video, we're going to be looking at this. This is McFarlane Toys Peacemaker, and it's part of the DC Multiverse line. So this figure represents John Cena's character in the new movie, The Suicide Squad. And as of this recording, it's August 6th, 2021, and the movie premiered yesterday, and I got a chance to check it out. It was a fun time. I really enjoyed it. It's very cool. I was kind of really surprised that it's been 5 years since the first Suicide Squad movie, and that kind of just blew my mind. It felt like it was just yesterday. But here we are, 5 years later, and we have new toys for the new movie. So the figure I was most excited about was probably the Peacemaker figure, which is this guy right here. Mostly because I'm a big wrestling fan, and I'm a big fan of John Cena. So when they debuted the photos for this figure some months ago, I was really excited about it, and I was lucky that I ran into this figure at my local GameStop the other night. So I snatched it up, and here we are, and we're gonna check this out. So as usual, this comes in the black and white McFarlane Toys packaging for the rest of their DC Multiverse line. As you can see, this is a larger figure because it has the Build-A-Figure pieces, which we have over here for King Shark. And so here it is. Here's the King Shark. Now this is the figure that's gonna make me crazy. I really want the King Shark figure. It looks awesome when it's assembled, but I have a feeling I'm gonna have a hard time trying to find all the pieces to build the guy. And I want to say, I think they're offering King Shark as a fully assembled figure. Maybe, I'm not sure if it's through the McFarlane Toy Store or if they're releasing some sort of like box set or 2-pack. If you have clarification on that, write that down in the comments below, because I really think they're releasing this dude fully assembled, but I'm just not sure how I'm supposed to get him. So looking at the figure inside the packaging, it looks great. I just love how these larger boxes kind of frame the accessories in the figure. And even see the little trading card you get in the back with John Cena as Peacemaker. On a side note, I believe there's a San Diego Comic-Con exclusive version of the Peacemaker figure. And I want to say I think that one comes without the helmet. Now this is one of those things that kind of irks me, because there's certain toy lines like Marvel Legends where you'll buy a figure and sometimes they'll give you the alternate head and you can just swap it on. Mattel does that also with their WWE figures, and it just annoys me that with McFarlane Toys, this is kind of like a dirty trick from a very old playbook. When they want you to double dip, toy companies, especially back in the day, they do little things just to make collectors crazy, because they know that some of us are very OCD, or that we're completists, and they might re-release a figure as a repaint, or they might play dirty and just change one tiny accessory. And for me, I don't know, as much as I love this figure, there's part of me that is kind of annoyed that if I want to get this figure without the helmet, it's like a San Diego exclusive. And it's not like the figure is entirely different. I think the only thing different is that the San Diego exclusive has the maskless head, and I think he comes with an axe as opposed to the sword. But if I'm wrong, correct me in the comments below. But I think that's how you get the maskless John Cena as an exclusive. Either way, this figure looks really cool, and I'm excited to check it out. On the back, we have a nice photograph of John Cena as the Peacemaker. And here we have all the components needed to build King Shark. And with John Cena, you get number 3, the arms. So the other figures in this line, There's Polka Dot Man, and that's figure number 1. And he includes, looks like, the head and the lower torso, or I think the abdomen. Number 2 is Bloodsport, and for that you get I think that's the upper half of his chest. And number 4 is Harley Quinn, and you get the shorts and legs. So for me, I'm already kind of having anxiety because I know it's going to be impossible to find these guys. I mean, I could just probably cave in and go online and get them. But for me, I enjoy the thrill of the hunt. I like going out to the stores and, save myself some money on, shipping and stuff. But at the same time, you lose time driving around town and, spending money on gas trying to, find these things. But, I don't know. All right, let's get to the figure. So, the movie is awesome. I enjoyed it a lot. And as I stated earlier, this was the figure I was looking forward to the most. The Bloodsport figure looks cool. Same with Polka Dot Man. The Harley figure, it's not the costume I prefer from the film. So I think I'm a little bit lukewarm towards that one. But this figure really caught my eye, and it's being stubborn. Alright, let's get this thing out. Okay, so here we have the Peacemaker figure. So, as you can see in the tray, we have these 2 giant plastic arms for King Shark. We have Peacemaker himself, the sword, and there's underneath, there's a display stand, and then there's the trading card. One thing that surprised me with this figure is that, so in all the trailers and the promotional shots and everything, Peacemaker's always shown with that giant pistol he has. So I was kind of surprised that the figure came with a sword. He does use a sword in the movie, but it just kind of took me back just because of all the images you see of Peacemaker. He's always wielding some sort of firearm. And I saw on social media, I'm not sure if this is accurate or not, but someone mentioned that DC kind of sent a mandate to McFarlane Toys that they're supposed to refrain from including firearms with their action figures, and I don't know how true that is. And the case in point was the re-release of Flashpoint Batman. So if you're familiar with the character of Flashpoint Batman, that's actually Bruce Wayne's father, Thomas Wayne, from an alternate timeline / universe. And Flashpoint Batman, he dual wields 2 pistols. The first release saw the figure with the 2 pistols. Then there was a variant that came with Flashpoint Batman where it was unmasked and he saw Thomas Wayne's head. And there was a recent re-release of the figure. I think it was the masked version, and that figure didn't have the pistols at all. And I think people were saying that was because DC mandated that the McFarlane figures can't come with firearms anymore. I haven't read anything about that. I haven't really done any research into that, but I've seen that mentioned a couple of times. So, if you have any information on that, whether it's true or not, just leave that in the comments below, because for me, I'd like to know what's going on, because, if there's a character that's supposed to have a gun and he doesn't come with a gun, that's kind of bothersome to me, because it's it's like if you bought a Punisher figure and he didn't come with any pistols or rifles, that'd be kind of annoying. So in the case of Peacemaker, I was kind of surprised that he didn't come with a firearm. He comes with a sword, but it doesn't bother me that much. And this figure is being stubborn. I would yank the tray off the card, but I plan on displaying this mint on card, and I don't want to ruin the package too much. Alright, there we go. Okay, so if you've been a frequent visitor to my channel, you'll know that I'm a big fan of the McFarlane figures. I think the level of detail and quality is amazing. I have some issues with some of their figures. They're not perfect and they have kind of slight flaws. But I really feel that McFarlane Toys, they're kind of pushing the envelope in terms of the engineering. And it seems like they're taking risks and trying to, kind of push the technology a little bit further along as we, progress into this new age of action figures. And this is a wonderful figure. And I think this figure clearly embodies a lot of that kind of ideology that McFarlane Toys, they've been kind of like showing off in their new modern figures, whether it's the Mortal Kombat line or the DC Multiverse stuff. There's some really interesting things going on engineering wise, and yeah, this is a beautiful figure. Alright, let's take a look at it up close. So we'll start with the head. So we have Peacemaker here wearing his helmet. It's a nice shade of silver. When you watch the movie, it's a really reflective chrome. I want to say the helmet on the action figure looks a tad too big. Like maybe if they shrunk this down by like maybe 5%, it would be a little bit smaller. Because the helmet's not this giant as it is in the movie. In the movie, it's a little bit smaller. It kind of conforms to John Cena's head a little bit better. Whereas this one looks a little bit larger. It's still a nice sculpt though. It has all the creases, the hard edges. Like if you look on the helm, there's this kind of ridge that kind of like arches his cranium, and on the side there's some nice detail sculpted here. There's some nice elevated ridges on top of it. The eyelets around the eyes, nice and clean. And the cool thing about this head is that it looks like it's a two-part mold. It's not just one mold that's painted. So the helmet is actually a separate piece than the face, and it's evident when you could kind of lift part of the helmet out. So that's a nice touch there. It adds a little bit more realism. The paint application on my eyes, they look decent. I don't see any like smudging or overspray. The likeness of John Cena, it looks all right. I mean, even though he's wearing a mask, his lower jaw, it looks all right. I think his lips could have been a little bit wider, but it still looks like John Cena. Moving down towards his torso, the emblem on his chest, it's nice, clean, and it's painted. The body armor on top, it's slightly elevated from the rest of his uniform, so you do feel that kind of like relief. He has these shoulder pads up here, a nice micro texture along his uniform in the red. You can kind of see it here in the sleeves and in the chest. There's a couple of seams, and if you look close enough, you can see that this uniform is actually a soft rubber overlay, or maybe it's like a more pliable plastic. So this is what I was talking about in terms of the engineering. As opposed to the upper torso just being like a solid plastic piece, it really feels like there's something underneath this kind of like plastic sleeve that goes over his upper torso, which is cool. I'm not sure how much. For me, it kind of covers up what's going on the inside, so I couldn't really tell you how this functions. I'm guessing a ball joint. So yeah, with his upper torso, it looks like, I think there's a butterfly joint. Yeah, he could butterfly. So he could go out like that. Alright, one thing I think they could have changed is that, so for the joint on the inside, I kind of feel they could have done with a red plastic, so that when it breaks out, it kind of blends in with the rest of the sleeve. It's kind of being nitpicky, but when they go through such great lengths to like really push the engineering, I don't think that's too much to ask for, making that piece red as opposed to this black. Because I think it'd make for a much cleaner figure, especially like if you're into fig photography. Because I know there's some fig photographers they'll kind of cover up the blemishes and the inconsistencies, like using Photoshop, and they'll make corrections. So for me, if I'm a fig photographer and if I have Peacemaker's arms out like this is kind of like, it kind of glares and it's in your face that there's this black joint here. It seems like it's an easy fix would just to be, mold this in red so it kind of blends in together. But that's just me being nitpicky. But yeah, it gives you great motion though, despite the fact that the color kind of bothers me. Now the butterfly joint, I'm not sure, even though it's there, part of me feels like it's a little unnecessary because the amount of range of movement that you have in this arm as it goes out, it's pretty far as it is. And the butterfly joint doesn't seem like it adds that much more to it, because you can see it appear right there. It's not like it provides such great access where all of a sudden his arms could like fold back, all the way. And it's unfortunate too, because even though there's a butterfly joint, it seems like this plastic overlay is a little too stiff, so you can't bring his arms in all the way like you might think you'd be able to, just because that gives you that range of motion. It kind of fights it just a little bit. So even though the technology is there and they're kind of pushing it, the two technologies kind of fight each other. You're being progressive and you give us this overlay and you give us the additional articulation with the butterfly joint, but at the same time this plastic's kind of harder and that it's sculpted a little bit too wide that it can't allow the figure to like fully range of motion and go inward. Once again, that's me being a little bit nitpicky, but at the same time, if you're going to push the technology, just make sure that all the pieces play right together. But it's a wonderful detail nonetheless. As I mentioned before, it feels like there's something going on the inside. He doesn't really have as much of an ab crunch as he does in terms of just moving his torso completely, if that makes any sense. So as opposed to having like his upper chest and his abdomen move independently, it just feels like everything moves together. But there's enough motion here where he could kind of move forward, but not fully like crunch in. He can move this far back. Now this is just me being nitpicky again, but if you look at the details that are sculpted in this piece underneath, so it kind of maintains the consistency of what's going on here. You have a micro texture here, and the seams continue downward. And even the padding, this blue padding that's sculpted on the side, it continues also in this piece underneath. Unfortunately, this part isn't colored blue. So then when you do like move the figure to the side, or if you have him crunch or move back, it exposes this kind of like gaping gap here. And the illusion's kind of broken because, it would have been helpful if this part was painted blue also, just so it kind of maintains that consistency of the cloth stretching outward. So in a neutral position, it looks like this, and it works because this goes down. But the minute you move it forward, the illusion's broken, and you kind of get this red gap. I understand, some of these things are probably like cost-effective measures, but the detail is there. So if they could have easily went further and just painted this little section here, they didn't have to even go too far up. They could have just painted it at least this one segment, just so the illusion isn't broken. So with the lower portion, it's kind of this soft rubbery plastic. It's almost like a diaper. And I've stated this before, like, I think the technology is great with these softer plastics. My biggest concern is, like, how well will these last the test of time? If you've been collecting action figures for a long time, you'll know that there's certain issues with specific plastics that over periods of time, certain things kind of change, and, the plastics might start breaking down. They might become more brittle. For example, there are a lot of action figures that, if they have like a soft plastic cape, or if they have like softer plastics, you might notice this with some of the older Toy Biz figures, or even some of the old Jakks WWE figures, is that over time the plastic, they start becoming very tacky and very sticky, And from my understanding, it has to do with the plasticizer. It's a chemical inside of the plastic that I think after, such a long period of time, it starts oozing out, or it starts melting the plastics from the inside or on the surface. But in this case, I'm not so worried about these plastics melting as more so about them cracking. It's almost similar to like dry rot that happens with rubber. For example, one thing I collect BMX bicycles, and one thing is that you have to make sure that, if you're not riding the bicycles very often, the air leaks out of the inner tubes, and then the tires, they deflate. Well, you want to keep what happens if you keep the tires deflated, something happens called dry rot, where the rubber kind of breaks down and it loses its elasticity, and it becomes a little bit more of a drier and more brittle material. And with these softer rubbery plastics, that's something I'm kind of wondering what's going to happen, like a year from now or 2 years from now. Are these rubbery plastics, are they going to start breaking down? Are they going to start, like rotting or become more dense and brittle? Will they start to crack? So even though that, as much as I'm excited for this technology, for me, a lot of it's new, and it's always going to be the test of time that's going to see how long something like this is going to endure. I think it's great that you have these software technologies that allow you to like move, like he could kick forward and you have the actual crotch piece bend along with it, so it looks a little bit more seamless. But at the same time, is that what's going to be the compromise? We have this great new plastic feature, but in a year or two, do I have to worry about this piece cracking? So that's just one of the things that kind of like runs through my crazy brain. Moving back to the figure, looking at the lower half of the figure here, once again, the issue of paint pops up again. So with this like blue stripe that runs down his side, so I mentioned that there's a gap here, and unfortunately there's another gap right here also. It seems like it had been such an easy detail for McFarlane to paint this little piece of padding up here blue, just so this stripe would maintain that illusion of being like one solid piece. But it's kind of broken up due to the lack of paint, as you can see on both sides, here and over here. But not to take anything away, it's still, everything here is still beautifully sculpted. You have some really nice seams coming down his legs. A wonderful micro texture that this really highlights the detail in his pants. His knees are double jointed, which is always nice. In terms of there's no thigh cut, so there is no thigh swivel, but his legs could rotate a little bit. I'm gonna say maybe about like 10 degrees inward, and maybe not so much outward. I don't think alright, so there's no boot cut, so there is no boot swivel. His ankles, they're articulated, they could kick up, and they could rotate. And unfortunately, I don't think there's a rocker on these. And his toes do bend. So one thing that's bothered me lately with some of the McFarlane toys, alright, so I'm a big fan of them, but some of these articulated joints, they're kind of done very poorly. Like here, if you look at his ankle and his boot, it's horrible. They don't do a good job of disguising the ball joints at all. It's fully exposed. So as you know, these figures try to aim for such realism in terms of the way they look and the way they're engineered, but when you come to something as simple as like the ankle joint, it's like there's no reason why this ball joint should be fully exposed like that. For example, like here's a Hasbro G.I. Joe Classified Snake Eyes, and if you look, the boot and the ankle, it's very clean. Even though the heel kind of protrudes a little bit out towards the back, the joint, it allows for the same range of movement, but you don't get that really in-your-face ball joint that you get right there. So I think they could have done a better job of this disguising or masking this ball joint here. Even though that's gonna be the compromise. Do you want the full range of movement where it goes, you know, you could go back and forward? Or would you rather have him look more realistic and the articulation be a little bit more limited? For me, I'd prefer it to be a little bit more limited and just have the boot look more realistic. Mostly because I think the designers have to ask themselves, okay, we're going to provide an action figure with so much articulation, but at the same time, you know, is it going to, you know, mar the appearance of the figure itself? And how functional is the articulation going to be? Like, even though this ankle, like, you know, kick all the way back and move this much forward, you know, is that really necessary for this action figure? Because I know there's some collectors out there that, as much as they like the articulation, you know, I think they're kind of turned off when stuff looks a little too crazy like this, you know, with the ball joints. It's kind of like those amazing Yamaguchi figures. You know, they're super articulated. You get them in such crazy poses, but at the same time, there's ball joints and seams, and the figures kind of look like a mess sometimes. So I don't know. I mean, I guess it's more of a personal preference, but if I was to be nitpicky and honest, you know, it does bother me that there's such a exposed ball joint like that, especially when they go through such great lengths to give you such a realistic looking sculpt. But you know, the sculpting is beautiful regardless of that. I mean, just look at the folds here in the pants. One thing that bothers me is the arms. So John Cena has these monster arms. If you ever watch him wrestle, or if you've seen him in real life, he's a beast. Like, people always talk about how big The Rock is, but I think they forget that John Cena was like super giant long before The Rock became like this incredible Hulk of a man. And his arms here, they're not as well defined. They're not very vascular. John Cena, if you've seen him, his arms are like ridiculously veiny at the biceps. He has these, besides his bicep being giant, he has these huge tricep muscles in the back. And this one looks a little bit more flabby. They're not as cut or defined. If I was John Cena and if they handed this to me for like approval, I'd probably tell them, you know what, go back and make my arms 10% bigger and like 15% more cut. Because, I don't know, I don't think they do his arms justice. But, you know, the articulation is there. There's a bicep swivel, double jointed elbows. And again, the problem, at least I think it's a problem with the wrist joints. The McFarlane wrist joints, they allow for the range of motion because they're articulated well, but they're kind of gappy, and it exposes the ball joint. And once again, you know, like, here's a Hasbro figure, and they do a good job of hiding the articulation. Granted, it's not going to have the full range of motion as this guy, but it has enough range of motion to do what it needs to do. So yeah, this, I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm hating on this figure. I like it a lot. But I think my expectations are just a little too high, just because, for one, it's like I said, I'm a big John Cena fan, and I love the McFarlane stuff, but I kind of feel like that they could have went that extra step to make it just a little bit more perfect. There's some omissions as well. In the movie, there's some pouches that are on Peacemaker's belt. I'm not sure if he has the pouches consistently throughout the movie. I believe he does have a holster for his pistol, but since he doesn't come with a pistol, I guess it doesn't make much sense to have the holster here anyways. But yeah, this is a great figure. If I had to rate this guy numerically on a scale of 1 through 10, the lowest I would say I'd give it would be a 7 3/4. And the highest I'd give it would be an 8. I'd give it an 8.5 or a 9 if, you know, they fixed the paint issue here and if they did a better job of hiding the ball joints. But this is I mean, regardless of that, this is a beautiful figure. It's really indicative of the stuff that McFarlane's putting out nowadays. They do such great work. I'm looking forward to getting the other figures like Polka Dot Man and Bloodsport. And of course, King Shark. I really want that King Shark I mean, his arms alone are almost the size of this figure. So I can't imagine how big the completed King Shark figure is going to be. Do I recommend this figure? Of course I do. I think everyone's going to want this, especially after they see the movie. And it's great that, you know, with the McFarlane stuff, that you're kind of like at the point where you can assemble a small collection of movie figures, because they have the Justice League ones, they have the Suicide Squad ones, and what else do they have? They had the Green Arrow from the CW, so that's a more realistic looking figure. So yeah, it's kind of cool that with McFarlane Toys you could kind of start assembling this like realistic interpretation of these superheroes. So if you want to have, you know, one part of your shelf be the comic book guys, you could. If you want one part of your shelf being the DC like video game guys, you could. And if you wanted like the movie characters, you know, you can finally assemble a decent small collection of movie inspired figures. Yeah, so this is awesome. Great figure. Yeah, so even though I sounded a little bit nitpicky on this guy, by no means am I hating on it. I think it's wonderful. If you're a collector of wrestling action figures, you know, I think you'll need this just because it's John Cena. And if you have the old Mattel Suicide Squad figures, unfortunately these are larger scale, but at the same time I think it's a great addition to just to having, you know, being able to expand that collection of Suicide Squad guys. And speaking of Peacemaker and Suicide Squad, I showed this video off a few days ago. This is my custom Peacemaker John Cena figure, and I knew this was going to happen. So the reason why I made this guy was because I thought I would have a hard time finding this guy. But every time I make a custom of something, like, it's not that much longer, and they actually released the figure. So I just made this guy a few days ago, and then, you know, wham, all of a sudden I have this. But for me, it's cool. It kind of takes the pressure of me trying to find the maskless version of the figure. Plus, at the same time, this is for me a nice sentimental piece, just because it uses an actual Jack-specific Ruthless Aggression wrestling figure body, and the likeness of this John Cena I like a lot. So for me, I have two versions. You know, I have my own custom one, and I have the official one. So I'm going to display these together, and I don't know, I think it's a kind of a neat thing. So let's wrap this up. This video, I say this all the time, my videos run a lot longer than I expect them to. But yeah, let's close the show. Get this figure, it's awesome. And good luck if you want to assemble King Shark like we all do. You know, I hope you all find the pieces as soon as you could. I hope you don't have to resort to the secondary market and they can find them cheap, or if you know another collector that has it, maybe you can do a trade. You know, complete your collection of Suicide Squad guys. You know, group them all together and take a nice family photo. And I don't think you'll be disappointed. You know, the McFarlane stuff, it's awesome. I really like what they're doing, really pushing the technology. Yeah, so this is awesome. So once again, my name is Lou. Thank you so much for checking out this video. I greatly appreciate it. If you're new to this channel, welcome. And if you're a returning viewer, thanks again for your support. I appreciate all the comments and criticism and, you know, stories you might share about your own toys and your own experiences. You know, I think that's a fun thing when you can share that with other people in the community, so continue to do so. So until the next time, I will talk to you later. Take care.